My first time trying the Magic Wand rechargeable happened in a room full of queer sex bloggers. One summer night, somewhere on the Oregon coast, a bunch of my blogger friends and I gathered in the living room of the house we'd rented. On the agenda, watching queer porn and trying out the new wireless Magic Wand, which had just come out. The atmosphere was more friendly than sexy. We kept up a running commentary over the porn, joked and laughed together, but we were all holding wands against ourselves, getting more and more turned on. My friend Epiphora called this activity casually Hitachiing.
That's what I was doing. I was casually using the magic wand.
I'd been out as bisexual for 8 years already, and had grown to love the way that my queer friend groups happily blurred the line between friendship and sex way more than my straight friend groups ever did. So masturbating together with my merry band of bloggers felt as natural and normal to me as eating breakfast together at the kitchen table. I loved the new magic wand instantly, but I also loved the sense of queer joy that pervaded the room. I guess it wasn't surprising that our sex bloggers retreat went in a sexy direction, especially since it was co-organized by Epiphora, who's been to many a queer sex party in her time.
I'm Epiphora. I have a sex toy review blog at heyepiphora.com, and I have been reviewing sex toys for 15 years. At this point, I have over 1,000 of them in a beautiful closet in my office, and I like to say that I have a very discerning vagina. I don't know what else you want to know about me. I'm really gay. I love magic wands.
Epiphora, whose friends call her Piff, was one of the writers who inspired me to start my own sex blog in the first place, and was one of my first friends in the biz. Aside from sex toy reviews, though, another topic she covers on her site is the queer sex parties she goes to. Naturally, as a longtime sex toy expert and a good party guest, she never shows up empty-handed.
I bring like a harness, a dildo, a magic wand, and then some other things that I end up never using. The magic wand, however, is almost always used. I don't think I'm an exhibitionist at all, so I actually don't love being watched when I'm doing these things at sex parties, but it's so low-key that it's really easy to feel like I'm not being watched. I'm just in the corner or whatever in my chair doing my own thing, and everyone knows that. And that's when I created the term casually Hitachi and decided that that's what I was doing. The intensity is enough that I could get off at any point, but the lower setting of the Magic Wand Rechargeable is just perfect for this low, ongoing stimulation that I really love during parties. I just sit back, find a nice chair. Usually I'm wearing a dress, pull my dress up a little bit, and use it through my underwear. And I just watch people. And it's amazing. It's like watching porn in front of me. It's merely enjoying the sex that's happening in front of me. And it's not necessarily for an end game of an orgasm. It's how to participate in this fun, sexual activity, this orgy.
I've been to a few queer sex parties myself, and I've noticed that there's almost always at least one magic wand in attendance, to the point that I've put stickers on mine to differentiate it from other people's. It's just an incredibly common item in the nightstands and toy bags of queer and trans folks. And in this episode, I'd like to talk about why that is. I'm Kate Sloan, and this is Making Magic, How the Magic Wand Became the World's Most Famous Vibrator.
I think it is so iconic and so pervasive in queer communities because really the people who kind of spread the gospel of the magic wand were queer people.
Here's Tristan Taormino, the sex educator and author. She's right. The magic wand's history is chock full of queer folks who've loved it, many of whom taught others to love it too.
I'm thinking of Betty Dodson, of course, and all of the body sex workshops she did beginning in the 1970s. And then I'm also thinking of, Carol Queen, Susie Bright, Joni Blank, who started Good Vibrations in San Francisco.
These types of trailblazers, not to mention Tristan herself, have all been queer influencers of sorts, recommending products they really liked to people who trusted their recommendations. Even before our modern idea of an influencer existed, there were queer zines, queer sex ed workshops, and queer porn to guide us. Here's Eva La Prima, director of Crashpad Series, one of the best-known queer porn sites.
You know, when you see something either on Instagram, TikTok, or whatever, it's like a commercial for itself. Even talking about it, you see folks enjoying it. You see it in your favorite pornos, or you have seen it and been curious about it. I know when I first saw it, I was curious, like, what is this microphone-looking thing? And magic wand is pretty prevalent in the queer and trans community. I think it's because of not only the design, but also its availability. Sex retailers like Good Vibes, they're more accessible to queers and trans folks who take their sexuality into their own hands, no pun intended, and have a tolerating and loving and accepting approach when it comes to sex and sexuality.
It was a situation where queer folks are working at Good Vibrations. Good Vibrations is one of the first sex-positive feminist sex shops. It's happening in very queer San Francisco. And so that's the thing they recommended when you came in the door, right? And I think it just propagated from there, by word of mouth. And again, I would think when you hooked up with a queer person, if you'd never seen or used the magic wand, they likely had it. So then you're like, wait, I should probably get one of those. I would say that categorically, every single person I've slept with in the past 20 years uses the Hitachi magic wand. I mean, that's just that's fact. So I have several in my house, in my sex toy dresser, because that's what people in my bed want.
I interviewed a lot of queer people for this series, and it was interesting asking them all if they thought the magic wand held a special place in the queer community. Some of them were puzzled by the question, explaining that plenty of straight people also use the wand, which of course is true, and that many queer people don't use it or don't like it, which is also true. But some of them, like Tristan, felt that the wand and the queer community do have a close relationship that goes back decades and continues to this day. Addison Finch, the tattoo artist and illustrator we met last episode, summarized it like this.
I put the magic wand up with, the image of a strap-on. Certainly not everyone uses a strap-on and not everyone uses a magic wand, but to me, it's just such an inherently queer item. If you think about how originally, it wasn't designed as a sex toy, and folks were like, okay, but you know what it's really good for? Doing weird sex stuff.
Addison has a deep interest in queer history, and he likened the magic wand to Crisco, the cooking oil that has historically often been used by gay men as lube for fisting. He told me about something he saw in a history book called Leatherfolk.
There's a really beautiful image of the back room in the Catacombs bar in San Francisco of 2 or 3 slings, leather slings hanging, and then buckets hanging next to them for where they would put the Crisco to have these fisting parties. And it's just so amazing to me. To me, the magic wand is the same.
Queer people are used to being sexually creative because we've long had to adapt to living in a world structured around heterosexuality. We created a hanky code so we could subtly convey our sexual interests to anyone who knew which color meant what. We repurposed dental dams, taking them out of the dentist's office and into sapphic safer sex. We put gender in a blender and made drag. We are inventive as fuck, and sex toys are one area where that's especially true. Of the 2 sex toy stores I've worked in, one was an upscale boutique with what seemed to me like a mostly straight clientele, while the other was located smack in the middle of Toronto's gayborhood and had a high proportion of queer customers. Addison and Epiphra have both also worked in sex toy retail, so I was curious if they'd noticed, as I had, that ostensibly straight and queer customers tend to differ a lot from each other, not only in their toy selections, but also in how they seem to think about sex toys in general.
When it comes to sex toys, the most common thing that I hear from people who are having straight sex, I suppose you could say, is I want it to be small, out of the way, easy to use in PIV, which makes sense.
PIV, by the way, refers here to penis and vagina intercourse. There are queer people who have PIV, of course. I'm one of them, but I think it's fair to say that it's the quintessential straight sex act, and it's one that tends to be lacking in clitoral stimulation, hence the desire to incorporate a vibrator into it.
The magic wand is really large and difficult to fit in there. It's not that straight people don't use it. They do. People find ways to use it, but I think that people who are not as familiar with toys are not going to go straight to the magic wand for that purpose.
you get people who are like, tell me about the magic wand. I've heard so many good things. I want to know about it. And then you get other people who are like, oh my God, that thing is scary. That thing seems huge and intense, et cetera, et cetera. Like there's always kind of a noticeable divide. And it wasn't like across the board, but like a lot of the times you're like, are you queer? Okay, you probably think it's normal. Are you? Are you? Or like if you're like a sex person, you know what I mean? Like if you're a kinky person, if you're somehow part of like a sexual minority, there was a very different vibe between like, I mean, I know you've worked in sex toy retail, so I'm sure you're familiar, but like straight couples who are like, I want to spice things up. And then like queer folks who are like, there is no prescribed activity for what sex looks like. We're talking about our desires. We're using toys. We're using vibrators. Like these are just like so essential parts of like the way that we have sex.
I think a lot of the differences between queer and straight people's usage of sex toys comes down to differences in sexual scripts, by which I mean the implied order of operations for sex, the mostly unspoken mutual understanding of how sex will go. Straight sex scripts are much more ingrained and more restrictive. Here's my friend Billy Lohr, a sex educator and porn performer who's also worked on sex shop sales floors.
Queer people are just in general more predisposed to using sex toys and having a familiarity with them. They're more predisposed to, I don't know that adventurous is the right word, but it's the one I'm going with, adventurous sex in general, because queer sex involves talking about the sex you have, involves being creative with the kind of sex you have. There is much less of a pre-assumed script of what you're going to do or what you're going to like or how your bodies are going to interact. So we're already talking about it. We've already got some familiarity with it and some comfort with it, that it's a really easy leap to start looking at other things that might typically be considered taboo. I mean, the way we have sex baseline is considered taboo by plenty of people. So, like, why would a sex toy be that scary?
Queer people, though, are having all kinds of different types of sex. I don't want to sound straight phobic, but someone accused me of that one time. So I don't want to, like, act like queer sex is always so much more different than straight sex. But I do feel that cis-het people have a pretty narrow understanding of sex in general.
To be clear, obviously not all straight people are having ultra-scripted, joyless sex. I don't think our species would have gotten this far if that was the case. But there is scientific evidence that queer people embrace sex toys more readily and benefit a lot from doing so, in a way that many straight people could learn from. I wanted to speak to a researcher who could shed some light on these findings, and I knew just the person to ask.
My name is Debbie Herbenek. I'm a provost professor at the Indiana University School of Public Health, Bloomington, and author of several books. The latest is Yes, Your Kid, What Parents Need to Know About Today's Teens and Sex.
Dr. Herbenek's research has covered an amazingly wide array of sexual subjects, from masturbation to condom usage to pubic hair trends. But of course, for the purposes of this series, I was most interested to chat with her about vibrators. She's co-authored numerous studies about them at this point, but faced some resistance to the topic when she first got started.
Even within my field, I mean, there were some of my mentors who like actively discouraged me from studying anything related to vibrators and sex toys, which I found so strange because here we were in sex research. Some of them were sex therapists who were, advising individuals and couples on using vibrators and sex toys. But when it came to doing research, I mean, really, some people just didn't want to talk about it. I think, one of my mentors advised me that it could be, career ruining for me to do that. And that's not the case for me. I think our research on vibrators and other sex toys and how people use them and why they use them and their experiences with them gave voice to a lot of people's experiences and have been really positive parts of my career.
I asked Debbie what correlations her research has found between someone's sexual orientation and their usage of vibrators, and she said queer people are indeed likelier to use them.
Absolutely. Yeah, they just are. Vibrators, other sex toys, they're substantially higher among gay, bisexual, pansexual men compared to heterosexual men. For women, there's just higher rates compared to men in general, but still, even within women, we found higher vibrator use among bisexual and lesbian women. And an interesting thing that we found in our research, with looking at relationships and sort of whether people tell their partner about their vibrator use or whether they keep it from them, is that, we were able to look at that for heterosexual women. We could look at that for bisexual women. We were unable to do those analyses for lesbians because lesbians, were not hiding it from their partners. Women with male partners, there was always some chunk that were hiding it. For men, for fear that they wouldn't be accepted or that their male partner would be insecure about it, that it would be some type of a problem. Whereas for women partnered with other women would say things that their partner generally felt positive, about them using vibrators. So positive or encouraging or, understanding it or finding it sexy. So it wasn't such a problem between women. Vibrators can make it easier to orgasm no matter what your genitals are like. But we can also think about it as a sign of something else. I mean, maybe that it's also like a stand-in for being open-minded about sex or taking a more playful approach to sex and just sort of being less beholden to traditional norms around what sex has to be like or look like or feel like.
People have a lot of opinions about the appearance of the magic wand, as we've talked about in previous episodes. But one big benefit of the magic wand's aesthetic, at least for some people, is that it's effectively genderless. Its design, its packaging, and its marketing copy all convey a certain ambiguity or androgyny. There's definitely a time and a place for more traditionally gendered-looking sex toys, as many people find them cute and affirming, but they shouldn't be the only option. The magic wand, by contrast, has always been more or less gender-free, in part because it was originally designed and marketed not for stimulating vulvas or penises, but for soothing muscles, and we've all got those. The wand's aesthetics and marketing aren't the only reasons it's so popular among trans and non-binary people, though. It also just works really well on a broad range of bodies.
Yeah, it was like a game changer for me.
This is Anna Valens, a journalist, VTuber, and former columnist at the Daily Dot, where she wrote about trans people's relationships to sex and their bodies, among other things.
So I had a source that was like the inspiration for me back when I was doing my trans sex education column. I had a source that I'd rely on. I really got the idea to do this column from her. Her name's Octavia, and she worked at the time at Babeland. And I was just a year or two out, and she was the girl you would go to at Babeland to get all the dolls fixed up for whatever sex toy they needed, because the market, especially at that time, was really bad for trans girls. There was no one writing about good sex toys at all for trans women and stuff like that. And, it's already like that, but it's it was even worse back then. There was no one you could really go to. So I went to visit Octavia and I was talking to her and she's just get a magic wand. Just get a magic wand. And I was really?
Anna had tried another wand and thought it was, all right.
Octavia was get a magic wand. You won't regret it. I'll even give you a little discount. She told me that the way the rumbling sensation worked on the lower settings of the magic wand actually kind of penetrated the nerve network a little bit better for the penile nerve system. I got the rechargeable and that was it. It's my daily driver, the same exact one. It's nearly been a decade. I'm impressed that that thing is still fully functioning, but it still gets the job done and then some, so...
By the way, the reason the rechargeable works well for penile nerves compared to other vibes is that its first two speeds are rumbly, as opposed to buzzy. Let's hear from sex toy expert Epiphora about what that means.
One of the most important things that I discovered about vibrators as I continued in my career is that there is a very big difference in the motors in toys. And there is a continuum, and people in the industry started naming it, so now we call it buzzy versus rumbly. The Magic Wand Original is a buzzy vibrator, and that was partly why it didn't work so much for me. It's a high-pitched type of vibration. It's more surface level, and I think that's why it made my vulva itch, versus rumbly, which is more penetrating, deeper, lower pitched, tends to get to the internal clitoris more easily.
In scientific terms, rumbly vibrators have a greater amplitude than buzzy ones. A vibrator moves back and forth slightly at a fast pace, which is what creates that vibration sensation. A higher amplitude means a bigger motion back and forth, which we experience as that rumbliness. This is why, as Piff mentioned, rumbly vibes aren't just good for penises, they're good for vulvas too. All genitals have some pleasurable bits on the surface and some that are more buried within the body, and low-pitched vibrations can rumble through the entire genital area. There are some people who prefer buzzy toys, in which case, great, I support them in getting whatever vibrator feels best for them. But in my experience, most people prefer their vibes rumbly. I fall into that category for sure, and so does Anna.
For me, it felt like it was more pleasurably stimulating. Like, this was a wand that could really properly stimulate my nerves and really just kind of get me into that sweet spot I needed to kind of zone out, be in the moment, feel pleasured, and reach a state of orgasm. Wands that are pleasurable for other bodies are not going to be quite to the same level of pleasurability for trans women compared to the magic wand. It's just hitting that sweet spot too well.
Besides the amplitude of its vibrations, one of the other reasons the magic wand is a favorite of many trans people is that it can help alleviate some gender dysphoria. Here's Billy explaining what that means.
All right, this is going to be the broadest definition in the world for dysphoria, but it is basically some misalignment between how my body exists in my head and how it exists when I look down and look at it, right? And some discomfort in that. I think a lot of people expect it to be like looking in the mirror and this loathing of like, oh no, those tits shouldn't be there or whatever. And for me, it was never that tangible, I suppose. For me, it was just a mild discomfort. Things didn't feel quite right. No bra made my tits look the way I wanted them to. No shirt made it look quite right. Everything just kind of felt weird. And then not having them there felt so much better than baseline. I sometimes describe it as like putting on glasses and realizing that's what the world was supposed to look like. And dysphoria isn't exclusive to trans people either. Cis people experience it too. It's when a cis woman has some hair on her upper lip and looks at it and like hates the way that looks because it feels like she has a mustache, right, and needs to go get it waxed, right? Or, you know, a dude puts on a shirt that has like kind of a cinched waist in the middle and like hates the way that makes his body feel or whatever, right? There is also a layer on top of all of that, right, that has to do with how society interacts with us and how the world perceives us, right? There are plenty of trans and non-binary folks I know who have absolutely no issue with their tits, except for the fact that everyone assumes the fact that they have tits means they're a woman, and it has led to, like, thousands of tiny, annoying interactions all fucking day long. So dysphoria, while we often talk about it as an internal experience, it can't be separated from our experience with the world, because unless you're a hermit somewhere, you are encountering the world, and it is going to impact how you see yourself.
The feeling of dysphoria Billy's talking about is considered distinct from the medical diagnosis of gender dysphoria, which is often used to pathologize and gatekeep trans people seeking gender-affirming healthcare. And as both Billy and Anna pointed out to me, not all trans people experience dysphoria.
I will say that I don't really experience genital dysphoria at all. I'm pretty proud as a trans woman to have a penis. It's something that I've written a lot about, but I can still speak from an expert perspective about it because I've either had a lot of partners that are trans feminine and have a lot of genital dysphoria, or just simply, you know, I've spoken to a lot of people in the community and I know different ways they relate to the wand. And I think what's really interesting about the wand is trans feminine individuals can engage with it in two ways. For trans women like myself that really don't have genital dysphoria, they have minimal genital dysphoria, you can basically like apply it directly to your penis, right? You can also like put a sheet over yourself or just be wearing like panties and apply it to your girl dick around like the tip, the shaft, the frenulum. I'm usually like a frenulum kind of girl. I like that area. So you can do that. And I've known a lot of trans girls who will like basically just like cover their penis and they'll just completely sort of like pretend it's not there and just apply the wand to their girl dick, and like that's kind of it.
For trans women and trans femmes, being able to hold a vibrator on their bits, have a little bit of distance from their bits, right? Maybe slip it between their legs and clamp their thighs around it, right? For many of them may feel gender affirming because it feels like stereotypically how women would masturbate, right? I talk about this a lot in my blowjob workshop, where a blowjob looks like someone's head in your lap bobbing their head up and down. And yes, I don't have enough bottom growth that you really need to bob your head up and down all that much to get from like base to tip. But looking down and seeing a thing that looks like a blowjob feels good to me because it is in line with what my gender says is happening. I would imagine that for many trans women and trans feminine folks, looking down and seeing a magic wand between their legs could feel affirming in a similar way, right? Because it is a thing that is recognized as how women masturbate. And it's this iconic fucking tool for the job.
But another way, and I think this is particularly important to note, is the way that you can use the wand for perineum stimulation, right? You can take the wand and put it right against the taint. It's right near the prostate. They're neighbors. I think that's the best way to put it. And with the right amount of pressure, and it doesn't require much, you can hit the prostate right away. I mentioned a lot, the late Mira Bellwether's work, Fucking Trans Women. And one thing that zine talks about in detail is how, it's not just that there's like penis, anus, and like that's it down in a person's like nether regions. It's a very complicated interconnected web, so you can use the magic wand at different parts of that web. And for a lot of trans feminine individuals that own the magic wand, they'll just simply apply it to the perineum, maybe with some thrusting sensation as well, so it's a little bit like being penetrated, right? And where is the taint located? Well, it's basically around the same place, not quite, but almost, more or less, where, the vulva would be, right? So it really simulates that feeling of like, basically having a pussy and being penetrated. Is it one-to-one? No. Is it a really good experience for someone who does have genital dysphoria, can't get bottom surgery yet, and would really like some experience that feels more affirming to the way they would prefer their body to work, to be? Yes, absolutely. And all this isn't even talking about the simple fact that for a lot of people that have had bottom surgery, of course the magic wand is going to be fantastic. It works for, cis women's vaginas and vulvas. Of course it's going to be a fantastic experience for trans women, trans feminine individuals that have also gotten bottom surgery.
Anna's talking here about vaginoplasty. Only some trans people undergo gender-affirming surgeries, due in part to access barriers like finances and transphobic healthcare systems. But also some trans people just don't feel that they want or need surgery. From what my interviewees told me, it seems like the magic wand can truly work for all types of genitals, regardless of whether they're surgically constructed or not. It can also work well for genitals that have changed as the result of gender-affirming hormone therapy, HRT. Though a couple of the people I interviewed told me that they need to make sure the head of their wand is lubed now, because HRT can make the skin of the penis thinner and more prone to irritation. Not all gender-affirming procedures involve the genitals, though. Billy remembers using the wand shortly after top surgery, which in his case was masculinizing chest surgery.
I had really limited mobility, right? When I had top surgery, I have 2 scars now running right across my chest, right? And when that was healing, sitting up using my abs or my chest and shoulders, like engaging any of those muscles was really challenging and really exhausting because all of the energy my body had was being put towards healing, right? I also had really limited movement in my arms. I couldn't move most of my upper arms from like the elbow to shoulders very far away from my body. I had to kind of keep them close, like I was walking around like a T-Rex, right? So trying to keep my arms kind of glued to my side and moving very minimally made it really hard to like thrust with a dildo that I was using, right? Or it would make it really hard to use a particularly small vibrator. Whereas the magic wand, it's kind of a set it and forget it of sex toys, right? I could prop it between my legs, hold it in place mostly with my thighs, and get myself off that way. And I could see that accessibility extending towards folks who struggle with other types of mobility, whether in recovery for some type of surgery or whatever, or as a more long-term thing.
Both Billy and Anna mentioned to me that one other benefit of the wand for many trans people is the way it offers you some distance from your own genitals. You don't have to look at your junk or touch it directly, which may induce dysphoria. You can just put a wand on it and enjoy the vibrations. This particular insight really resonated with me, even though I'm not trans. And the reason for that is I'm on the asexual spectrum. Maybe it's surprising to hear that the lady making the Vibrator podcast is a little bit ace, but it's true. I'm demisexual, which is an identity on the asexuality spectrum and means that I don't develop sexual attraction to someone until I feel emotionally connected to them. For me, part of how this manifests is that I can go long periods of time without particularly wanting sex, especially when I don't currently have one of those deep emotional and sexual connections in my life. And when I'm going through a period of low libido, masturbation can start to feel kind of distasteful. I'll still get the physical desire for release every once in a while, but the process of reaching that release feels kind of gross or upsetting, especially if I'm touching my genitals directly. It helps a lot to use a wand at those times because the long handle acts as a buffer between me and my junk. And the vibration is so effective that I can get off quickly and move on with my day. I wanted to ask some other people on the ACE spectrum about this, so I posted on social media seeking an ACE-identified person who uses the magic wand. I ended up connecting with Margaret.
So my name's Margaret. I am a 27-year-old, primarily asexual NB who uses she/they pronouns.
Let's define asexuality for those who might be unfamiliar. It means that you don't experience sexual attraction to other people, or that you only do in very limited circumstances. Importantly, a lack of sexual attraction doesn't automatically mean a lack of sex drive or sexual activity. Some asexuals masturbate, some asexuals have sexual relationships, some asexuals participate in kink, some do none of the above, or all of the above.
I had like little school crushes and things like that, but it wasn't until I think I was in high school and I started having romantic feelings for people, I realized I don't actually think I want to have sex with them. Maybe I'm this other thing called ace.
Many asexuals are also aromantic, meaning they don't experience romantic attraction. But some, like Margaret, do feel some degree of romantic attraction, just without sexual attraction. Margaret told me she bought a magic wand after seeing some sex ed videos about it on YouTube. She'd had some underwhelming sexual experiences and was hoping the wand would be more enjoyable.
I wonder if the people I've been sleeping with just aren't good at it, and that's why I'm not interested. And it turns out, no, just not interested. The infamous magic wand. I enjoyed it pretty much right away. I was like, yeah, no, this is good. I see why there's so many good reviews. That's when I was like, oh, okay. So the people were just not good at sex. Just because I feel sexual attraction doesn't mean I don't get horny. Like, it might be very, like, infrequent because I don't think about sex as often as apparently everybody else seems to. And then I'll be, like, really stressed or really tense or just, like, I get really irritable or I get my really bad PMS symptoms and I'm like, oh, right, that's a thing that people can do to relieve stress. I should go try that now.
Once again, the wand's clinical aesthetic can be a benefit for some users.
I have other vibrators and sex toys, but I don't like things that are extremely lifelike. I'm sure part of my aceness is that I find all parts of bodies kind of weird. So seeing fake parts of the bodies is even weirder for me. I think that the sterility of the magic wand, while it might not be the sexiest thing, makes it a lot easier.
As a fellow ace spectrum person, I find it really comforting that there's this vibrator which doesn't really look like a sex toy and which requires very little effort or engagement on my part, but can get me off hard every time. That type of consistency is hard to find in this wild world.
When I first was learning about ace stuff, my mom was like, well, maybe she just hasn't met the right person yet, or maybe she has a hormone imbalance, or something like, has she seen a doctor? And it seems like there was a huge misconception of like, we're broken. There's something wrong with us medically, which is just not the case. And the fact that I can achieve orgasm despite the fact that I'm on like an SSRI, which usually kills it, just kind of proves to me I'm definitely, there's nothing wrong medically going on there. Seems like things are still operational.
There are a lot of reasons I'm enamored with the magic wand and its story. But I think one of the big reasons is that it's an object that has given pleasure to people who I think deserve a lot more pleasure in their life, including the LGBTQIA+ community.
I think for queer folks, a lot of us, especially because we were denied the feeling of pleasure as teenagers, but also denied the feeling of, being out and having that experimental phase of our lives at a young coming of age, rite of passage in our lives, right? Like the high school, teenage, formative years. A lot of us don't come out until college or later. So I think for a lot of us, it feels cruel to say catching up for lost time, but there is a part of it of catching up for lost time and really thinking, well, I finally have this opportunity to to understand, explore pleasure. I've been denying pleasure all my life. So what is pleasurable for me? Oh, and by the way, not just am I going to explore the question of pleasure, but I want a more expansive understanding of it. I want to understand that you don't hit a wall where it's good enough, right? You can always find something else that's new and exciting and interesting that brings pleasure to you. I love trying out new sex toys for that reason, because I'm always curious, is this going to unlock a sensation for me that I didn't know existed? But yeah, I think we just have a very open and expansive view of pleasure that is often lacking in the straight community.
There's also a lot of straight men who feel threatened by sex toys, right? So they will come in and say, I need something for my girlfriend. And I'll say, okay, do you want something that is like insertable or just outside? And they're like, whoa, well, she has me for that. Or like they wouldn't want something too strong because they think that they won't be able to satisfy her or whatever, right? But queer folks don't seem to have that hang up. So like, they're not looking at the magic wand and being like, oh, that's so bulky. How's it gonna fit between our bodies? Isn't it gonna get in the way? Mightn't it desensitize them? They're looking at that and going, look at that powerful fucking thing. Just think of the sounds my partner will make, right? So I think it is just that queer folks are more predisposed to seeking out things that will bring them fun and pleasure in sex and have a lot less hang-ups that might drive straight folks away from using the magic wand. And I recognize what I'm saying is everyone would love the magic wand if they didn't have a ton of hang-ups, because it is objectively the best sex toy in the world, which, you know, might be a slight stretch, but I kind of stand by it.
I've loved learning about how the magic wand fits into the worlds of feminism, porn, kink, art, and queerness. And next episode, we'll see how it fits into the world of health and medicine. We'll talk about why the magic wand is beloved by many people with disabilities or chronic pain, how wands can help people struggling with depression, and whether your doctor will ever be able to prescribe you a vibrator. Until then, keep on making magic. Making Magic is hosted and co-produced by me, Kate Sloan, edited and co-produced by Jamie Pittenger, and made possible by the generous support of Vibratex, with art by Addison Finch. Special thanks to my guests for this episode, Epiphora, Tristan Taramino, Ava La Prima, Addison Finch, Billy Lohr, Dr. Debbie Herbenik, and Anna Valens. You can find links to their work in the show notes.